Next on the Georgia Vote, we head back to the polls with several races now in a runoff. We hear from the candidates for Georgia's 3rd congressional seat, DeKalb County CEO and Clayton County Sheriff. Also, gun violence front of mind after a day of mayhem in metro Atlanta. Our Joe Ripley is at the White House to hear the Biden administration's plan they say will create life-saving solutions. And we head to Powder Springs to tap into the mind of this week's Voice of the Voter. All next on the Georgia Vote.
From the 11 Alive studios, this is the Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Welcome into the Georgia Vote. I'm Zach Merchant. Faith Jesse has the day off. We are now just 48 hours away from a big runoff election that will finalize the races headed into November. And today, we dive into 3 of the biggest contests. But first, it was another packed week in Georgia politics. Vice President Kamala Harris in Atlanta Friday, extending a stretch of visits from the Biden administration to our key battleground state. She was here for an appearance at the 100 Black Men of America's 38th annual conference. This was her 4th visit to the Peach State this year. After stepping off Air Force 2 at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the vice president discussed the U.S. Supreme Court's Friday ruling striking down a federal ban on bump stocks. These are used to convert a semi-automatic rifle into a weapon that can fire at a rate of hundreds of rounds per minute. The ban was put in place after a 2017 mass shooting that killed 58 people at an outdoor music festival in Las Vegas. Harris called the decision a rollback of gun control policies.
Let's take this seriously. Let's understand that we all have the ability to weigh in on this important issue, especially when 1 in 5 Americans has a family member that was killed by gun violence, when we know that gun violence is the #1 cause of death of the children of America. Not cancer, not car accidents, gun violence.
And it won't be long until the vice president is back in town. She returns on Tuesday. Harris will participate in a moderated conversation with hip-hop artist Quavo at his Rocket Foundation Summit. 2 major shootings putting the issue of gun violence back in the spotlight here in Georgia this week. On Tuesday, a gunman opened fire in a downtown Atlanta food court, injuring 3 people. And later that same day, police say a different man hijacked a Gwinnett County bus and killed a passenger. Joe Ripley from the 11 Alive political team went to Washington, D.C. to hear the Biden administration's plan to curb the problem of gun violence across the country.
I come to this work as a survivor first.
This work is personal for Greg Jackson.
April of 2013, I was caught in a crossfire and shot, and the bullet that hit me hit 2 arteries, nearly costing my life.
Now, Jackson hopes to save lives. He's the deputy director of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, established in 2023 to reduce the problem nationwide.
Gun violence is intensely impacting Black and brown communities, and this is the #1 cause of death for all youth. #1 cause of premature death for Black men.
The trend troubling, especially in Atlanta, where police are investigating 2 shootings this week.
We invested for the first time in community violence intervention programs, community-led strategies that we know can intervene and work with those who are most at risk before a shooting happens, especially in Black and brown communities where interpersonal conflict really fuels a lot of the violence.
The Safer Communities Act, passed in 2022, cracked down on unlicensed private sellers, which the Department of Justice identified as the #1 source for trafficked guns through gun shows or online marketplaces.
Anyone who's engaged in the business of selling guns must be licensed and must conduct background checks. That's an additional 20,000 private sellers that now have to be held to the same standards as gun stores.
Jackson preaches de-escalation to prevent gun violence because the trauma is personal, and so is the work to address it.
Reporting from the Juneteenth Regional Reporter Summit at the White House, I'm Joe Ripley, 11 Alive News.
This past week, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens stressed there were too many guns on the streets getting into the hands of convicted felons. The mayor says his Office of Violence Reduction works to address gun-based crime locally. Now to Tuesday's runoff, we invited the candidates in 3 of the biggest races to come to 11 Alive to discuss what they say they would do if elected. We start with the race for Clayton County Sheriff. Our Faith Jesse sat down with Jeff Turner to hear his vision for the future of the office.
If you look at my proven record, I was in law enforcement for 23 years. Last 3 of those years, I was chief of police. During that time, I brought community-oriented policing to the community, to the county. I had my officers go out into each community, each neighborhood, and bridge that gap where we can count on our community supporting the law enforcement officers as well as the officers supporting their community, not only in the capacity of answering calls for service, but to make sure that they see law enforcement officers as part of the community. So it's more about not answering those calls for service as it was connecting with the community to get that community support. Then you look at my 12 years as being the chairman of the county. I have established relationships, I have built budgets, I have operated large budgets. I have the experience, knowledge, and proven leadership to make all of those promises that I say I can do a reality.
What are you doing day one when you get in there?
Day one, I have to address the issues in the county jail. There needs to be a reclassification of every inmate in there because, from my understanding, they have violent offenders mixed in with misdemeanor offenders. That's not acceptable. I have to make sure that we look at the detainees who have mental issues. Everybody who's in jail doesn't deserve or need to be in jail because they're some type of mental issue that they may be having. So we need to go in and look at every detainee in there. We need to reclassify them. We need to make sure those who have mental issues are getting the proper help. We need to make sure that those who are violent, those who are gang members, are placed in separate areas. Those who are there under misdemeanors, they need to be addressed accordingly as well. If they don't have a criminal history, then there's no problem with asking for them to be released on their own recognizance or their bond to be set low. But there are so many things you can use to mitigate the population within the jail itself. Then you got to make sure, or I will make sure, that the staff is properly trained. Those who have the skill set to do certain jobs need to be in those positions. Those who don't do not need to be in those positions. People always ask me, why are you going from chairman to a sheriff? Some people think that's a step down, and I argue with them. That's not a step down. Because for me, I don't need a title to define who I am. It's about the service. How can Jeff Turner best serve the community that he loves?
You can see our full interview with Jeff Turner online right now at 11alive.com. We also repeatedly invited incumbent Sheriff Levon Allen to join us for an interview today, but he declined. And next, we take you to Georgia's 3rd Congressional District to hear from Mike Dugan and Brian Jack, the 2 Republicans seeking a runoff victory. And later, we are in Powder Springs to talk with a local brewery owner about what's fueling his decisions this election year. Welcome back. We now turn our attention to the Republican race for Georgia's 3rd congressional seat. This runoff pits former state Senate leader Mike Dugan against former Trump White House advisor Brian Jack. I sat down with both of the candidates, and you'll hear from them in alphabetical order according to their last names. We begin with Mike Dugan. Why should someone vote for you over your opponent?
I'm a much better opponent. Nah, I'm biased on that too. This is what I was talking about a second ago. It comes down to you got to have a level of leadership that's representing you in the district. The leadership that I have learned from early childhood, that was refined during my 20 years plus in the Army, in a variety of situations. The leadership that I had in the senior role within construction industry afterwards, and the leadership that my peers honestly gave me as the majority leader of the Georgia Senate are all things that help position me to be able to more effectively represent our constituents.
If you're sent to Washington, D.C., what's going to be your #1 priority?
Number one priority is, and this is going to sound kind of strange, it's not a big grandiose idea, it's learn about the people that are around me first, those that are serving with me, because you have to know who you're going to be able to work with. I mean, there are people up there that have different visions and versions of why they're wanting to go to Washington. Some title, some for other reasons, but I want to find the ones that want to work. Now, position thing, the first thing that we really need to take care of is the border. And the border's an issue in multiple different ways. It's a humanitarian issue. It's a national security issue. It's even a local law enforcement here issue that we have not effectively addressed. And that's something that we can make an impact on almost immediately.
Do you support a federal policy limiting or banning abortion access?
I'm very pro-life, and you probably are going to get into a question about the heartbeat bill that we passed in Georgia while I was the majority leader. Fully supported that. But I'm also a big proponent of states' rights. I think one of the issues that allowed us to get to the point that we're at today is the Supreme Court said that these were not federal ones, these were state issues. And as much as we can to empower our state governments, we should. Part of the issue, even going back to the budgeting thing a little while ago, is the federal government often gets involved in stuff that it's not really federal government responsibility. So let the states run the states.
You've heard Mike Dugan's plans. Now we turn to Brian Jack to hear his vision for what he'd do if elected. What sets you apart from your opponent, and why should voters choose you over him?
Well, I'm privileged to have received 47% of the vote in the first round, and nearly doubling my opponent. I think he got about 22 or 23%, and that's an affirmation of our district's response to my message. I had a very positive message throughout this campaign. I'm proud of it. And I also think as it relates to experience, you know, working by President Trump's side for the last 8 years has been a very unique experience, and one that's afforded me a chance to see how he transformed the country, and one that gave me a chance to do it myself for those 4 years working at the White House. I worked with President Trump to secure the border. I worked alongside him to ensure we passed the largest tax cuts in American history, and I worked with him to appoint and confirm conservative judges. So I'm very proud of that record of experience. And I haven't run for office before. I'm not a politician, and I think that gives us a unique chance to elect somebody new, somebody different, and somebody that gives a fresh voice and a new generation of conservative leadership.
If you're sent to Washington, if you win this race, what's your number one priority?
Well, I think our number one priority going forward is the border. I mean, we have an open, porous border, and in my mind, that's in large part done because Joe Biden sees there being political advantageous perspective to having that open border. So I think we've got to do everything we can to secure the border. I think that we've got to do everything we can to cut taxes in 2025, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in this interview. A lot of the Trump tax cuts that I helped pass expire. We've got to make those permanent. But I also talk a lot about weaponization of justice. We've got to do something about this two-tiered system of justice that's all across our country. And we saw it play out last Thursday in New York City. And I want to do everything I can to fight back, to push back, and ensure that never happens again. I'd also later on like to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and some of the stuff that we're seeing, new emerging technologies that I think this next Congress is going to have to grapple with.
If you're elected, would you support federal legislation restricting or banning abortion access?
Well, I think what we did, and first and foremost, I just want to remind your viewers, I had a chance to help appoint and confirm not just those 3 U.S. Supreme Court justices during my time in the White House of President Trump, but also over 230 federal judges up and down the federal bench. And I'm very proud of that, and they interpret the Constitution as written. And as we saw in 2022, something that most scholars never thought would happen, those judges interpreted the law as written and gave that power to the states. And here in Georgia, we have state legislation, and it's strong state legislation that protects life, because I am very pro-life, and I'm proud of that ability to have played a small part, but an important role in ensuring that we nominated and confirmed a court that interpreted the Constitution as written.
We had extensive conversations with both candidates. If you want to hear more, head to 11alive.com. And next, we head to DeKalb to hear from the 2 candidates looking to become the county's next CEO. You're watching The Georgia Vote. Welcome back. We turn our attention now to the Democratic race for DeKalb County's CEO. Michael Thurmond is stepping down after being in the position since 2017. And now 2 commissioners, Lorraine Cochran-Johnson and Larry Johnson, are now seeking the post, and both look to put their stamp on the county. Our Faith Jesse sat down with both commissioners. We begin with Lorraine Cochran-Johnson.
What does day one look like for you in office?
Day one for me, the first thing I'd like to do is lift a current executive order that was signed in 2020 during the global pandemic that sent employees home to work remotely. I am not opposed to a hybrid model, but I think it's time we come back Also, to immediately begin the evaluation of our 19 departments so that I can set about plans. I want to understand what we have. I also want to make sure that all employees in DeKalb County have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. One of the things that I've found in government is that in many instances, there is ambiguity, and that leads to a lack of accountability. So I want us to have an extremely well-run and responsive government. So in order to do that, I've got to determine where we are in our departments, what technology is needed, the key functions. Some roles may change, others may be redefined so that I can create the government that I know we need.
Would you say that the government in its current stance is broken?
I won't say that we're broken, but I definitely see room for improvement. Over the years, areas like technology, planning and sustainability, there are areas where we certainly need improvement. Many residents throughout the entire campaign cycle have talked about the lack of responsiveness when they're phoning departments. So I want to ensure that if you call DeKalb County, we are responsive. I also want to make sure that we have technology that bridges us across the board, because in many instances currently, particularly with code compliance, which is one of our areas that receive the most calls, it is not easy for our residents to determine where an issue may be in the pipeline. So I want to bring in software, client relationship management systems, so that we are cross-functional, so that we can quickly answer questions and also get them to the right departments for action.
That's Lorraine Cochran-Johnson's vision. Now hear from Larry Johnson, who says he'll hit the ground running if he's chosen by voters.
If the voters decide to put you in that seat,
Yes.
what does your day one look like?
My day one looks like, first of all, I want to thank the voters. You're going to see me at the shopping malls, gas station, convenience store, hanging out just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Now it's time to get to work. The second part is to connect with our county commissioners, because individuals win trophies, but teams win championship. You got to partner and collaborate and build the team. And then I'm not putting them in no particular order, but you also got to understand the people who deliver the day-to-day services. I'm going to go by my sanitation department and talk to them. I'm going to go to the police department, 911, and to connect with them to let them know what we're going to do, what's the vision is, that we got to put the people continuously first. And I want to talk about customer service. How do we do that together? We got to fill these potholes. We got to pave the roads. We got to make sure our Parks and Rec department is connected to our young people. We're losing them because they don't have, the passion is not there. And so we got to make sure we provide that passion to make sure our rec centers become wellness places, because I don't believe in at-risk kids. Everybody's had promise to me. And then I'm going to go by my seniors. You got to go see your seniors, because they're the ones who've been with me for years. And I tell people, you look at the race, you look at how it turned out. South DeKalb overwhelmingly picked me. South DeKalb overwhelmingly picked. Look at the data, they will tell you, because they know I'm a change agent. They know I'm going to take care of their business. They know I'm ethical. They know I stand about results. And I care about our people because I'm an intergenerational leader. I mean, I had one group called Under 21. They got nominated for a Grammy out of DeKalb County, nominated. Then one little lady got tried out for The Voice. So I've shown how we can connect the dots. And so my day one is going to be like day 10 in one, because I'm not going to be behind that desk. It's about economic development, making sure our public safety is the best paid, best trained, best prepared, working on mental health. Being in public health, I understand we're one crisis away, you and I, one incident away. But what services are available to make sure that we have some help for our young people and our seniors and everybody in between? You can see it on the street. People are walking around needing help because we don't have the services. But I want to make sure I provide those services around health, economic development, prevention, public safety, and making sure our infrastructure is strong.
You can catch our full interviews with all of the candidates right now. Head over to our page on 11alive.com/thegeorgiavote. After the break, it is our Voice of the Voter. See how one man's passion for brewing beer is helping to shape his ballot choices. Well, we say it every week. You can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. And this week's Voice of the Voter takes us to Skint Chestnut Brewing Company in Powder Springs to meet one of the men behind the beer, co-owner Doug Farrell.
We have 4 different 7-barrel Brewha tanks.
There's a whole backside that most people are not aware of at all that is really complicated, right?
Oh, it's extraordinarily complicated. Yeah, it's you know, we like to say it's about 50% science, 50% art.
Working with your brother-in-law, he's the brewer, you're the business brain. Family businesses have highs and lows. How do you all keep the relationship working? Do you keep the relationship working? Clearly you do.
Interestingly enough, the number one thing that we do or that we don't do is we do not discuss politics.
How do you manage that as a company and also as a place where people come to have conversations?
Everybody's welcome here. I don't care who you are. We bring your cat, bring your dog, bring your turtle. You know, we don't care what race you are, what sexual orientation you are. Just come on, have a good time.
It's a beer business, but it's really about people.
100%. It's actually probably a lot more about people. Beer just happens to be the lubricant that allows that to happen.
We've got a big election coming up in November. When you look ahead to it, what worries you the most?
The detachment. I'm not sure that there's any excitement for much of anything right now, and you know, I think a lot of that's warranted. You know, I think a lot of the American folks are pretty disappointed with how things have gone, and I don't care what side you're on. It doesn't seem like anything is really focused on improving what we have.
What are the 2 biggest issues that are going to help you decide how to vote?
That's probably the biggest issue that we have is you know, inflation. Our cost of goods keeps going up. Cost of power keeps going up. You know, and then on the labor side, well, guess what? We have families. We have you know, food that we've got to buy, and you go to the grocery store, you can barely afford getting food. Another big issue here in the state of Georgia are the distribution laws. Now it does allow for small breweries to open up to sell beer on premises, but if I want to sell my beer at a local restaurant or I want to put it into a local store, I can't do that unless I go through a wholesaler. Well, I'm too small. You know, we're a 7-barrel system. I'm not going to make them money, and they're not going to, you know, certainly not going to be able to make me money. So doing some self-distribution makes sense in the state of Georgia, which is not allowed.
We always end on this question. What are you optimistic about?
Local leadership, I think. Local leadership, I've been much more encouraged about that.
You think local is working better than national?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, kind of goes back to that old adage that all politics is local, right?
Politics sometimes really are local, and in just 48 hours, many of us are going to have the chance to impact what they look like. The polls open for runoff elections Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. We appreciate you so much for watching us today and hope to see you here back again next Sunday at 11 a.m. for another edition of the Georgia Vote.